As a gamer growing up in the 90s, and especially with the transition between 2D and 3D graphics, when we move from the likes of 8 and 16-bit consoles with the Sega Mega Drive, Master System, Super Nintendo, NES console, and then to move forward then to the next generation with the PlayStation and Sega Saturn and so forth. It was a really cool time to be a gamer, as there was so much experimentation involved with the games that were being developed at that time, and the PlayStation is home to some of the greatest games and series that literally started a whole revolution all on its own. But at the same time, it is also home to some of the most quirkiest and experimental titles that you could possibly ever see. And while some have stood the test of time, some have fallen under the radar of obscurity. But in saying that, a lot of them do offer some unique elements, while they not be as well refined compared to other games that had came before it or came after it. They still offer enough unique quirks and attributes that are worthwhile revisiting. And one of these games in question is Time Commando, that was developed by Adeline Software International and published by Electronic Arts for the PlayStation in 1996, and was earlier released on the PC in July 96. The game would also receive a later port to the Sega Saturn, but in Japan only in 1998, and the game has since in recent years been re-released on various gaming platforms with the likes of goodoldgames.com and even Steam. So with the premise of the game sees a private multi-global corporation that houses various different types of computers that are used to protect various data points and also try and emulate elements of history, being prone to take over with the use of a virus that has been used by an employee that has infiltrated the corporation while working for an opposing corporation in order to destroy their competition as such. But as a result, by setting up the virus on their systems, creates a whole threat that could literally change the state of humanity forever. And while the game is based in the future, it has a lot of really cool elements, and like going back to what I mentioned about the experimental stages of games development with the PlayStation, at that time during the mid-90s when all these games were being released, the one cool element that these games had to offer was their futuristic premise and look at the way these games were being portrayed at the time. And this game definitely had a really cool, unique vibe to it, and it sees you taking on the role of a special operations operative known as Stanley, and he's kind of more like a security kind of overseer that overlooks a lot of the various elements, and is pretty much kind of like someone that is more of a authority figure that has to maintain and overlook any possible issues or elements within the corporation. And then when the virus is triggered on the computer systems, he takes it upon himself then to try and stop the virus. But in order to do that, he has to enter into the vortex that has appeared at the central hub of where all of the computers have lined up in the main central tower, and then he's sucked into a time warp which literally brings him back in time to the early stages of humanity with the likes of the Stone Age. And then gradually, as you play through the game, you go through all of the different generations and centuries and different eras of humanity itself. So it's a really cool concept when you think about it, and it definitely gives you a unique look and take into what events would have portrayed or even looked like possibly at that time. So you have everything from the likes of the Stone Age to the Roman Empire, feudal Japan, medieval, Wild West, even both like World War I, and even a futuristic take on what could possibly be World War III later on in the game. So a lot of the influences will have certain reactions or altercations that could affect the future depending on the gameplay, which all adds into the story, which is pretty unique for its time. And while saying that, the game does have some really cool ideas and quirks, but at the same time did receive mixed reviews in the likes of games magazines, which, while it was praised for having some very unique visual styles with use of kind of like motion capture style backgrounds that almost look like pre-rendered backgrounds, but when you move into different areas it plays out almost like a movie, if you will, to move from one scene to the next, which was a really cool idea. But it also utilised various fixed camera perspectives that would have become more familiar with games like Alone in the Dark and later with Resident Evil that would have solidified as one of the most popular game types on the console. And where this game differs compared to a lot of other games seen at the time, while you do have access to various different combat styles with gun and weapon combat, you can also do hand-to-hand and martial arts style combat as well. Plus, with each era that you end up in as you progress through the game, you gain access to weapons and materials and resources that would have been reflective and relevant to that time period, so you'd have to use them in order to defeat enemies and to protect yourself, which again was really cool because it added into the whole aesthetic of what the game was trying to go for. So while the game did get mixed reviews in general, it did receive praise on many elements with regards to the graphics and features, stating that it was ahead of its time to some degree. But the main gripe and issue that most people had, and the main criticism that was received, was mainly down to the sluggish and clunky controls. Because yes, you could control the character in various different ways, but it was the combat elements that would be very clunky, and even with that, it was difficult to defeat enemies, especially in close range combat, because there's a lot of times where the computer AI would be too clever for you that you wouldn't be able to hit them as quick as they could hit you, and sometimes what could happen is they could wipe you out in only a couple of seconds because they would hit you until they knock you into against a wall or a corner and then just keep spamming hits on you, so you can't really get out of it. So a lot of it has to do with timing. Now it's one of those games, and even with the reviews that did state that it does have some really cool features and it is a good game, but only really for those that have higher levels of patience that can adapt and persist with the flaws of the game as such. So the developers of Time Commando were also responsible for creating the very popular Little Big Adventure series, that also would have been seen on the likes of the PlayStation and more predominantly on the PC, as it uses a very similar game engine with very similar graphical styles, which is very unique and it's very reflective of its time. So it definitely has some really cool features. Even for myself personally, like, I am a big fan of Time Commando regardless of all of its flaws, because the reason why it holds promise to me is it was one of the very first games I'd ever played on the original PlayStation way back during Christmas of 1996, and at that time I had been introduced to the likes of Resident Evil, which I have often mentioned on the channel. But Time Commando was also one of those games, because my mate that had the PlayStation at the time, he had a load of demos, and he had Resident Evil, he had Shockwave Assault, he had Air Combat, he had Tomb Raider, and he had Time Commando, and he was interested to show me all of these type of futuristic style games, because again, he was a big futuristic fan. So I had played Resident Evil before it, and then I went to get to play Time Commando, and yes, Time Commando was very challenging, and even for Resident Evil at the time, because getting used to fixed camera angles and tank based controls for the time, especially coming off of playing the likes of Sega Master Systems and Sega Mega Drives at the time, and even Super Nintendos, it definitely took a while, let's just put it that way, for your mind to comprehend the challenges behind getting used to the different control dynamics and systems, especially with a new console. And this game was challenging in its own right. I remember the first time I played it, I couldn't even get past the first scene. I literally just got destroyed by the first enemy that I came across, because I did not know what I was doing. It took me quite a while to get used to this game, even more so to a point that I ended up getting to play the game a good few times when my mate had it, but it wasn't until about 2 or 3, maybe 4 years later that I picked up the game myself on eBay, because again, it was one of those times where I went through a phase where I was wanting to revisit a lot of those older games, and I ended up wanting to just re-experience those games. But even at that, there was a lot of those games that I never fully got to finish, and Time Commando at the time, when I first got to play it, I never really got that far in it, but it was a game that I always wanted to complete and at least explore in more detail, so at least I managed to do that. And for a time I managed to get good at the game, and I did manage to finish it a number of times, and I really enjoyed the experience once I figured out what to do. And yes, the controls are clunky, but if you give it time and you have patience with it, it is a very enjoyable experience, and quite a rewarding one at that, if you do put time into it. Now, it's not for everybody, I'm going to be blatantly honest with that, but it's just, there's something about it. It's one of those unique games for me personally that brings it all back for me with the likes of the PlayStation, because again, that time when I got to play the PlayStation for the first time, like with all of these games, and Time Commando being one of them, it was one of the best experiences I ever had with playing games, and a lot of it contributes to getting to experience all of these games in all their glory. While I wasn't really good at them, but that wasn't to say that they were bad games in general, and looking back, it was just, they were the perfect games for me to play at the perfect time in all respects to it. You had the likes of Resident Evil, you had Time Commando, and then you were getting to play demos of racing games. It's just, there was so much abundance in what was available. It just really was crazy, and you know what, when I think about it, it was a blast, and I'm still a big fan of Time Commando. I will still go back to play it, even more so now getting back to with recording this video. I've been having a blast playing it it all over again. Yes, it's tough, and there's been times I've died more times than I can count at it, but I will still persist with it because I just enjoy the game. It's a real highlight for me on the PlayStation because it just brings me back to really good times and fond memories that I had with games over the years, and I would gladly go back to play it again in the future. So I will do a full playthrough on this game as well, which I will share on the channel at a later stage if you want to see it, because it's definitely worth looking into and it's definitely worth trying out. And even if you don't get to play it through emulation, or if you can't afford a physical copy of the game, which they are becoming quite expensive these days, but you can still gain access to the game now on the likes of Steam and Good Old Games now, so you can play it on modern platforms if you want to experience the game for yourself. So I do recommend at least having a go and see what you think for yourself. Even if you can find the game cheap enough on those platforms on sale, it definitely is worth having a look at for sure. So it's one of those games that, yeah, it's very reflective of its time, but it's just one of those games that in my own opinion is a unique hidden gem with regards to the history of games, especially during the early days of the PlayStation and just 32-bit consoles in general. While it will test others, those that stick with it will get the benefit out of it and they will enjoy it for what it is. It has enough unique elements, even though the story isn't as well described compared to other games that you would play on the system, and that was kind of a thing back in the day. Many games were always usually explained through likes of text dialogue or even just through FMV sequences with very little to no acting, which wouldn't really appear until later games, but you still got an idea of what was happening and what was going on and exactly what you needed to do. And while it is a bit linear in its approach to how it plays, and for some people it can probably become repetitive quite fast, but it still doesn't take away from the presence of the game and what it has to offer. I still think it's a cool game to play, and I do recommend that anyone try it out for sure. But I would love to know your thoughts of Time Commando for the PlayStation, or if you've played it even on any of the modern platforms, and what do you think of it overall? Do you think it's a good piece of, or a good slice of nostalgic history for consoles and other platforms? And is this something that you've had the experience with, or to even have the privilege to play back in the day? And if so, what do you think of it overall? So be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other types of unique video games and style entries like this that were also released on the PlayStation that are similar to the likes of Time Commando and other games like it, then you can check out the playlist on screen to see more of those games in action. And also be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to be updated of future videos. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.